All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to uncover the messy, fascinating, and honestly, truly global story of how cinema was actually born. We'll be exploring exactly how a flickering little novelty in a darkened room transformed into arguably the most powerful and pervasive art form of the 20th century. So, who actually invented the movies? You've probably heard that it was the Lumiere brothers back in 1895, right? If you ask almost anyone on the street, the story usually points to this lone genius narrative or a single fateful screening in Paris. But as we're about to see, the truth is way more complicated than one simple light bulb moment. The reality is that the movies were born out of an incredibly chaotic and vibrant period of experimentation that spanned the entire globe. Now, there's a profound irony in this legendary quote from the supposed founders themselves. They actually viewed their creation as a fleeting scientific novelty, definitely not a world-changing art form. Depending on which historical account you read, either Louis Lumiere or his father Antoine believed that, sure, moving pictures might last 6 months or maybe a year as a fun carnival craze, but they had absolutely no commercial future. They saw a quick buck to be made, but they completely missed the long-term potential.
Section 1. The myth of invention, a global phenomenon.
Historian Laurent Manoni argues something really interesting. He says that cinema was never a single-handed invention, but rather a long march that lasted for centuries and involved countless interdependent pioneers. I mean, the dream of projecting moving, illuminated images on a wall, that's almost as old as the dream of human flight. It evolved supernaturally from things like stereoscopic photography and magic lantern shows. Cinema is fundamentally a cultural mode of production. It's the culmination of so many multicultural and technical factors, not just some sudden mechanical breakthrough by one guy in a lab.
So here is the crucial point. The Lumieres were brilliant engineers, for sure. They gave us the 35mm projection standard. But they were literally standing on the shoulders of people like Bouley, Edison, and Demigny. In fact, here's a crazy historical fact. A French inventor named Léon Bouley actually patented a camera and projector called Le Cinématographe in 1892. But, get this, he failed to keep up his patent payments. It lapsed, and the Lumieres just swooped right in and used the name. Plus, Louis Lumiere claimed he dreamt up the film transport mechanism while sick in bed, but he had already seen drawings of a remarkably similar mechanism by Georges Demigny.
Section 2. A global chain reaction and simultaneous innovation.
Just take a look at this timeline. You can clearly see that the foundational technologies of cinema were bursting into existence almost simultaneously across the United States, Britain, Germany, and France. Notice that the Skladanovsky brothers in Germany were projecting their films to audiences a full month before the Lumieres' famous December screening in Paris. And British inventors Burt Akers and Robert Paul, they were developing 35mm cameras right around this exact same time. It was an absolute global race.
Now this brings us to the real game changer for the Lumieres. It wasn't that they invented the moving image, but by slowing the frame rate and actually projecting it onto a screen, they transformed a solitary novelty into a shared, communal experience. Edison's kinetoscope was basically a heavy box where one person bent over and paid to look through a little hole. The Lumieres, on the other hand, created an 11-pound, portable, hand-cranked marvel. By operating at a slower 16 frames per second, it was quieter, it was cheaper, and it allowed for a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio on 35mm film. That's a standard that would rule the globe for over a century. They brought people together in a darkened room to gasp and dream in unison.
Section 3. The cinema of attractions and visual spectacles.
So once this technology existed, what were people actually watching in those early Nickelodeons? Well, before Hollywood and complex plots, audiences went simply to be shocked and amazed by actualities. We're talking about a train pulling into a station or a staged kiss. Film scholar Tom Gunning famously calls this the cinema of attractions. The thrill was purely in the seeing. The camera was totally static, just capturing a slice of life in a single, continuous take. It was a confrontation, an exhibition, meant to provoke a visceral reaction, kind of like an amusement park ride.
Because of that direct, thrill-seeking appeal, cultural elites originally looked way down on movies. They considered them a lowbrow carnival trick, completely devoid of artistic merit or deeper meaning. Early cinema was viewed a lot like we might view cheap reality TV or supermarket tablets today. Actually, early on, the legendary director D.W. Griffith was so embarrassed by the medium that he didn't even want his name in the credits. He was terrified it would ruin his reputation in the legitimate theater.
But, the novelty of simply seeing a moving image eventually started wearing off. To survive, gain cultural legitimacy, and keep audiences hooked, filmmakers had to transition.
They had to stop just showing off the technology and start using it as a sophisticated tool for storytelling. They began turning to literary adaptations to borrow some of literature's artistic prestige. This is the big shift from a cinema of attraction to a cinema of narrative integration.
Section 4. Forging a narrative grammar. Creating a new language.
This is where we meet the true visionaries who invented the visual language we still use today. While the Lumières were filming documentaries of real life, magicians and artists like Georges Méliès and Alice Guy-Blaché realized that editing and forced perspective could completely trick the eye and build entirely fictional worlds. As Guillermo del Toro noted, while the Lumières recorded what was there, Méliès recorded what wasn't there. He gave us sci-fi and horror, literally washing his film by hand and spinning chemical vats to bring dreams to life. And we absolutely have to highlight the women here. Alice Guy-Blaché founded her own studio, Solax, in 1910, and Lois Weber was one of the highest-paid directors of the decade, tackling immense, controversial social issues on screen long before Hollywood became a corporate machine.
It's wild to think about, but as researcher Rick Altman shows, this era was incredibly chaotic. Cinema was desperately trying to find its identity. It was mimicking photography, vaudeville, and even illustrated music before finally solidifying into a narrative art. Cinema had a truly chameleonic talent early on. Nickelodeons didn't just show quiet films, they had barkers out on the street, automatic pianos playing, live singers. The movies were fiercely competing with and absorbing elements of live stage vaudeville before they firmly established their own distinct borders.
And then there's the Kuleshov effect. This was a massive discovery. Filmmakers realized that by cutting from a character's face to an object, they could invisibly manipulate our emotions. They were forcing us to participate in creating the story's meaning. The Kuleshov effect proved that cinema is a collaborative psychological act. The meaning doesn't just live on the screen, it lives in the mind of the viewer, as we connect the dots between, say, an expressionless face and a bowl of soup, or an expressionless face and a coffin.
Section 5. The birth of the spectator, or learning to watch.
Cinema didn't just change entertainment. It was a grand pedagogical experiment that fundamentally retrained human perception. It literally taught us an entirely new visual grammar. Think about it. If you dropped an 18th century person into a modern movie theater, they'd be completely disoriented by a jump cut or a sudden close-up. They wouldn't understand that skipping forward in space and time was even happening. Over the span of just a few decades, filmmakers trained the human brain to decode a highly complex, totally invisible language of edits and angles.
I absolutely love this thought. It reminds us that the way you just effortlessly understand a movie today is a learned skill. It was passed down from those flickering screens in the 1890s. Every single time you lean in during a suspenseful crosscut, or you feel empathy during a tight reaction shot, you're exercising sensory skills that humanity literally did not possess before the invention of cinema. We are all fluent native speakers of an acquired language.
So thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I want to leave you with one final question to consider the next time you're looking at a screen. Just as the Lumières, Edison, and Méliès unconsciously rewired the brains of their audiences back then, what are the new formats of our time doing to the way we perceive reality today? Keep that in mind the next time you strap on a VR headset or mindlessly scroll through a feed. Until next time, keep learning and keep looking closely.